Scroll was the first to express gratitude to Roland for his care and support towards all the witches. She mentioned that no words could adequately describe their gratitude, and they hoped to continue serving Roland in the future. Roland breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the witches were about to bid farewell collectively. Wendy couldn't help but laugh out loud. She explained that this place was the sacred mountain that witches had longed for, and as long as Roland didn't chase them away, they wished to reside there indefinitely. Roland was delighted that the witches felt this way. Wendy clapped her hands and asked the other witches to proceed to the dining hall together. Before leaving, Scroll glanced at Roland's exhausted face, expressing concern for his well-being. Roland reassured her, patting his chest and saying that his health was perfectly fine. After the witches left one by one, only Roland and Anna remained in the office. At that moment, Anna took a few steps forward and gently hugged him. Carl, who was about to come in to report on his work, stood at the door and saw the two of them through the crack, then silently turned and left. As the moon rose overhead, the scorching air gradually cooled down. Tassa sat in the courtyard, holding an oil lamp and walking out of the room. It was none other than Hill, who had been hiding within the skeleton's finger. The people with him were all his companions, former members of the circus troupe. Each person introduced themselves, and the last one was called Magician, who had infiltrated the largest rat gang. Since their failed attack on the dock, their leader had been killed by the church's judgment army. Tassa didn't care about the trivial details, as long as he knew that the biggest rat gang was now non-existent. Undoubtedly, it was good news. He could perhaps seize this opportunity to recruit a group of rats with nowhere else to go and expand his sources of information. Tassa tapped the table and spoke solemnly. As Roland's personal guard, he was responsible for collecting information from all corners of the kingdom. However, for the sake of formality, he still asked once again, "Are you willing to serve under His Highness?" Without any hesitation, the 5 individuals shouted, "We are willing." Tassa instructed them on how to meet and what the secret code would be. He also informed them that Timothy would not sit on the throne forever. Afterward, he let them leave. Hill mentioned that Timothy had returned from the eastern region. He had heard rumors that Timothy was recruiting a batch of rats to join his army. Many leaders had already gone to the palace. Tacit quickly realized that Timothy wanted these rats as cannon fodder, just like during the previous attack on the Changji stronghold and the border town. The only question was, what was their target this time? Outside the western city walls, refugees were undergoing an unprecedented identity check under the guidance of the soldiers from the First Army. At this moment, a middle-aged man cautiously approached. He claimed to be a carpenter and had heard that craftsmen could obtain a place to live. The staff confirmed this, but said that before that, they needed to ask a few questions, such as his name and whether he could read and write. He introduced himself as Marcel and admitted that he couldn't read nor write. The staff then took out a sheet of paper with carpentry vocabulary written on it. This initial screening method was devised by His Highness the Prince. He gathered craftsmen from various industries and asked them questions about their professional knowledge and corresponding handling methods, recording their answers to form an inquiry form. In this way, by comparing the questionnaire during the review and asking a few questions, they could immediately determine if the person was lying. After a few questions, Marcel was able to answer most of them, and his tone of speech became increasingly fluent. Just as the staff was about to give him his identification certificate, Barav appeared. He looked at Marcel and asked him to extend his hand. If he was indeed a carpenter, his palm should not be so rough, especially the 2 calluses beneath the palm, which would become smooth and tough from frequent contact with wood. Additionally, carpenters often use black ink to draw outlines, so their palms would be stained with a large amount of indelible black ink, making them dark, not yellow. Barav observed Marcel's surprised expression in response to his questions, and he gave Marcel a chance to tell the truth. Unable to hold back, Marcel knelt down on the ground and admitted that he was not a carpenter but rather a neighbor of the carpenter. The staff members were amazed at how Barav knew all this. Barav nonchalantly replied, feigning indifference. Seeing the staff members' shocked and admiring expressions, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. In the past, the person who had just been questioned would have undoubtedly been punished. Furthermore, under the influence of His Highness, Berov's way of handling issues had recently changed. Roland sat back in his office chair and carefully reviewed the statistical report prepared by Berov. It took 3 full days for the city hall to comb through over 6,000 refugees, and among them, the proportion of craftsmen was relatively low. In the end, only 150 individuals passed the verification process. Roland instructed Berov to arrange housing for the craftsmen and their families. After a moment of silence, Roland suddenly asked, "How many people have fled after the award ceremony?" Berov paused for a moment and replied, "So far, there haven't been any from the native residents, but there are 7 serfs. The eastern refugees are more numerous, totaling over 100. Roland let out a sigh. This was the moment when he realized that pushing the witches to the forefront would lead to such a situation. The native population of the border town had fully accepted the witches, and it seemed that most of the serfs also supported them. However, among the eastern refugees, despite receiving treatment from the witches and being in a desperate situation due to the destruction of their homeland, over 100 individuals still chose to leave. This somewhat surprised Roland. At this point, Berov suggested executing all of them. He knew that those who were determined to leave in such circumstances must have been deeply influenced by the church. They would undoubtedly become followers of the church, so there was no need to show them any mercy. Roland closed his eyes and thought to himself. Truly devout individuals who were loyal to the church would be the over 300 refugees who were unwilling to leave the capital even in the face of the plague. Perhaps these people who decided to leave the border town simply couldn't change their beliefs. If Roland were to encounter this group on the battlefield, he would not hesitate to defeat them. However, he couldn't bring himself to mercilessly wield his sword and kill a group of civilians just because their thinking was futile and their ideals clashed with his own. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to let Nightingale interrogate these refugees. If there were any spies or infiltrators among them, they would be captured, but the others would be allowed to leave. Roland stood up and asked Berov to join him in taking a few photos to relax their minds. In the courtyard in front of the castle, he called Carter, Axe, and Soraya to join them. In one corner of the garden, several boards measuring 4 to 5 meters in length and width were laid out, with a canvas covering the ground. Although the border town was not large at present, its future scale would be several times its current size. Roland planned to promote this means of transportation in the town, a simple and affordable device that could replace a horse. Roland lifted the canvas, and Carter was immediately fascinated by the novel contraption before him. With 2 wheels and an iron frame, everyone had different questions about it. Roland smiled and explained that it was a bicycle. He positioned his feet on the pedals, assumed a standard starting posture, and with a push of 1 foot, he rode the bicycle around the stone path in the courtyard. After completing a lap, Roland pressed the brakes and effortlessly leaped off the bike, gazing at his astonished subordinates. A sense of immense satisfaction filled his heart. Roland had called them over with a purpose in mind. He wanted them to learn how to ride bicycles first, and then have Soraya capture their cycling photo on wooden boards. He wanted all the citizens to see that for the price of 1 or 2 gold royals, they could possess a mount similar to the Lord, the commander of the First Army, the chief knight, and the chief administrator of the city hall. The 3 of them spent the entire afternoon frolicking in the courtyard. Carter lived up to his title as the chief knight and was the first to master the art of cycling. Axe followed closely behind and successfully completed a lap around the courtyard. However, Berov failed to succeed even after attempting more than 10 times. He either wobbled dangerously close to falling off or couldn't move in a straight line. In the end, Roland had Soraya draw a static image of him standing next to the bicycle, gripping the handlebars. Once the bicycle promotional artwork was taken care of, the prince returned to his office. With some time before dinner, he had his guards summon Kyle Sichi. With the breakthrough in the development of mercury fulminate, the research and development of the new generation of weapons could now be prioritized. Undoubtedly, in the era of firearms, caliber represented justice, and rate of fire represented freedom. The more powerful the weapon, the greater the glory. However, an awkward problem arose. If they continued to develop along this path, they would soon run out of the lab's supply of the two acids required. Roland assigned Kyle a new task to design a chemical production system that could efficiently produce the two acids. As Roland was not knowledgeable in these matters, he hoped Kyle would figure it out on his own. As Roland pulled open the drawer, intending to snack on some fish jerky to ease his boredom, he was surprised to find the snack drawer empty. He paused for a moment, then looked up to see a piece of fish jerky being offered to him, right at the edge of his mouth. "You were looking for this," the golden-haired woman across from him smiled. Roland took a bite of the fish jerky, unable to hide the smile that curled on his lips. "I thought you would remain lost in the mist forever." "That wouldn't be so bad." "At least others can't see me, but I can still see you," Nightingale replied, pursing her lips. Seeing the familiar expression on the other person's face, Roland couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. "You mentioned before that you didn't know what kind of expression to show." Roland chuckled. "This is good too." On a raised platform, Roland congratulated the students below who had completed their elementary education, becoming the first batch of graduates in the border town. The young girl among the audience brightened her eyes. It was her first time seeing Prince Roland. Roland hoped they wouldn't become arrogant and complacent. There were still many knowledge waiting for them to explore, to discover. Nonetheless, he wanted to express his congratulations. "Long live His Highness!" Someone shouted out, and soon everyone excitedly joined in, "Long live His Highness!" The young girl in the audience turned to her friend and said that she wanted to work at the bicycle factory in the future. The pay was good, and she could even get a new bike. When the cheers subsided, Roland smiled and informed the students below that he would begin awarding the graduation certificates. The first name called was Pip. Pip felt his whole body tremble as he looked at the prince. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. Stiffly, he walked out of the line, feeling the frantic thumping of his heart. Ever since he attended the award ceremony, he had a place he wanted to go. He couldn't become a military leader like Axe, nor possess the incredible abilities of a witch, but he had another path to take. Roland patted Pip's shoulder, congratulating him on his successful graduation. Pip looked at his graduation certificate. He was going to apply to the chemistry laboratory, aspiring to become a sage like Mr. Kylesichi. Despite being in the summer season, the ice and snow on the Hermes had hardly melted. Mean stood atop the tow, gazing into the distance while holding a report. It was surprising to learn that the witches could cure the current plague, and there seemed to be a powerful long-range weapon in Border Town. Tevrin slammed his fist on the table. He couldn't believe that Idiot had dispatched the Faceless to attack. If Heather were to return, she would surely be furious. Witches who could grow into pure ones were rare and extremely difficult to cultivate. Mean spoke slowly. Whether it's the Punishment Army or the witches, their ultimate goal is to eliminate the enemy. Some losses are unavoidable in the process. After reading the entire letter, Taefun couldn't believe that Timothy had launched a surprise attack on Changji's stronghold and completely wiped out the envoy group. The contents of the second letter came from two sources, a report from Petrov from the stronghold and intelligence from local spy. Combining the information, it appeared that a militia group from beyond the western border had indeed launched a surprise attack on the stronghold and plundered the church. They not only consumed the church's pills themselves, but also targeted the medicine stored in the church. As for the latter point, Neen found it somewhat peculiar. According to the report from Petrov, after setting fire to the church, the attackers immediately withdrew from the stronghold and disappeared without a trace. So how did they manage to ambush and kill members of the envoy group? The diplomatic envoy should have already arrived in Border Town, and the two should never have crossed paths. Taefun quickly realized this as well. Could it be? Could Roland Wimbledon have orchestrated the elimination of the envoy group and pinned it all on his brother, Timothy Wimbledon? Regardless, these witches heading towards the western border deserved their attention and thorough investigation. Min didn't respond but pointed to the third letter instead. You should read the final letter before we discuss further, he said. Taefun glanced at him with confusion and unfolded the letter. Soon, his hands began to tremble, and he could barely hold onto the thin sheet of paper. The letter revealed that a large number of witches had appeared in the fjord and destroyed all the churches. Min knew that those witches were far across the sea, and it seemed that Prince Roland Wimbledon of Greycastle posed the greatest obstacle to their plans. Min planned to lead 100 punishment army soldiers and pure ones who remained in the church to thoroughly cleanse the western border of Greycastle and seize an opportunity to deal with the fjord witches. Taefun wasn't entirely supportive of the idea. Suddenly, a flustered clergyman rushed into the room, carrying an urgent message. A massive fleet had landed on the coast of the Kingdom of Eternal Winter, and hordes of enemies were besieging the capital city. The situation was dire. Heather was desperately resisting, but the enemy numbers were overwhelming, and they had consumed the pills as well. The enemy's banners revealed an astonishing truth: the enemy fleet belonged to the Black Sail Fleet of Queen of the Green Water. The granite steps of the palace of the Eternal Winter capital have been stained with blood, and the smell in the air is a bit pungent. There are many corpses lying on the ground. There are God's punishment army, believers, and their own people. There are also sand people. After a while, 2 armored guards walked into the temple with a woman with her hands tied behind her back. Garcia knew she would not surrender, and she wanted to send Heather to the heavens. Heather can slowly beg the gods for salvation, or she can beg for forgiveness. She will cut off Heather's fingers and torture her so that she can fully experience the pain and helplessness of the citizens of Port Greenwater. Heather looked at Garcia coldly and sneered, then asked if Garcia is waiting to be crushed by the church army, or drifting on the sea for the rest of her life? Darika signaled her guards to do it. She already had a perfect plan. The army of the church is now attacking Wolfheart Kingdom. Hermes is like an undefended city. The guards drew out their daggers and approached Bishop Heather. Heather gritted her teeth and didn't let out a cry of pain. At this time, the bishop's left hand has become a bare palm, and there are beads of sweat on Heather's forehead. Garcia's Sand Tribe companions couldn't bear it any longer. Garcia laughed and told her, "Do you want to know how those witches in the church's hands will be treated? I guess you're not interested." At that moment, Heather suddenly burst into laughter. She said Garcia would never understand the greatness of the church. For those who opposed the church, destruction was the only outcome. Garcia chuckled, seeing Heather not uttering a word of plea even until her death. Back in the border town, which was about to face its last and hottest month of summer, Anna enjoyed her ice cream. Nightingale pushed open the door, followed by Maisie and Lightning. Roland noticed the weeds and leaves on their heads, realizing they had disturbed a bird's nest. Roland took out a pre-written letter from the drawer and handed it to Maisie, asking her to give it to Tilly when she returned to the fjord. Maisie hesitated for a moment, blinked a few times, and carefully tucked the envelope into her bag. Seeing her expression of sudden realization, Roland suppressed a smile. It seemed that the charm of the small town was quite powerful. Lightning also had a task. He opened the map and pointed to a southern region. He wanted Lightning to take Maisie for a flight and place 2 flags at the junction of the shallows and the mountains, marking it on the map. If Tilly agreed to send the witches, they would guide the sailboat to this location and be greeted by a hot air balloon. As everyone heard the news of possible new witches coming to the border town, they became excited. On the second day after Maisie's departure, Roland took the witches on board the new generation of hot air balloons. Before this, Roland handed them a stack of white papers and instructed them to spread them out to create a massive canvas, while Soroya painted. The pure fabric of the coating was much lighter and more resilient, with no seams at the joints, making it resistant to disintegration even at large sizes. Perhaps soon he would be able to start producing Berlin airships, dropping bombs from kilometers high, achieving 3-dimensional warfare across land, sea, and air. Just the thought of it was exhilarating. Anna looked at Roland and not sure what His Highness is smelling at. Lily sneered and said, "I guess he is thinking about those new witches. After all, His Highness is still a man." The entire voyage went smoothly. with the witches chattering incessantly in the air. After flying around the shallows for a while, the group returned to the castle aboard the hot air balloon. Roland noticed Wendy, who was in charge of direction control, occasionally pounding her own shoulders, appearing very tired. He had heard that women with large boing-boings often experience shoulder soreness, and specialized undergarments were designed to solve this annoyance. Although he hadn't verified this claim, it wouldn't hurt to give it a try. Roland decided to make a small gift for each adult witch. The merchant caravan from the capital city arrived at the border town. Margaret and the merchants sat in the hot air balloon. Margaret was excited, while Marlin was somewhat afraid. Although they, as ordinary people, were flying in the sky, Marlin believed it was all thanks to the witches. Without the witches, the hot air balloon wouldn't be able to take off. Margaret noticed that Anna was only releasing flames, and as long as there was hot air, the balloon would rise on its own. Margaret wanted to purchase 5 hot air balloons that could carry 1 person each. She intended to use them on the ship so they could spot nearby pirate ships earlier. Roland gritted his teeth and said the cost wouldn't be low. He estimated it would require over 1,000 gold royals. Margaret generously said, 1,000 gold royal for each balloon. Marlin was also very interested and was willing to help Roland promote them. The price offered by the other party pleasantly surprised Roland. The 1,000 gold royal were a 5-fold markup he had estimated for the price, but he didn't expect the other party to readily accept a price so quickly. He thought of another way to make money. Additionally, whether it was hydrogen or coal gas, they were both consumables that needed to be refilled in the border town after use. This would provide additional income. Roland pretended to hesitate for a while and finally nodded, saying, "Then it's a deal." In the slumbering isle, Ashes frowned as she looked at the letter brought by Maisie. She couldn't help but be surprised. She didn't expect Roland to choose Sylvie. Doesn't he care about having his identity exposed? Tilly was also unsure. Perhaps her ability annotation was written too vaguely, or maybe Roland doesn't mind revealing his identity in front of them to show his sincerity and cooperation. There's also another possibility, Ashes said. Roland might truly be Tilly's brother, so he doesn't care about Sylvie's abilities. Tilly smiled. She knew her brother better than anyone else. Throughout their lives, he excelled at evading and run away from all trouble, and it was impossible for him to wage war against the church to protect the witches. Ashes also saw the other witches that Roland needed, one of whom was Lien. She was one of the most important witches on Slumbering Isle. If she were gone, no one could repair the houses once they were damaged, and no one could alter the topography of the island. The same went for Honey, who could command animals to help everyone catch fish. It was thanks to her that they enjoyed various delicious seafood every day. As for the other 2 witches, Ashes didn't have much objection. Tilly's expression became serious, and she opposed Ash's words. What is useful and what is useless? When she sent them to the border town, it was with the hope of forging an alliance, not abandoning them. Regardless of their abilities, all the sisters who chose to come to this isolated island are witches. How can they select them based on the usefulness of their abilities if they want to build Slumbering Isle as a home for witches? Ashes understood that this was Tilly's genuine expression of anger. She knelt down on one knee and apologized. Tilly sighed and slowly spoke. Roland selected these 5 witches from over 100. Among them are the ones you mentioned, Candle and Evelyn, whom you think have little impact. Are they truly useless? Perhaps through this contact, we will be able to understand whether his selection of these 2 was a coincidence or if he saw aspects that we haven't realized. I don't want you to speak such words. All the witches are partners in our shared goal, not mere tools. The departure was scheduled for the next day, and the ship responsible for taking them to Grey Castle was a warship from the border town. Sylvie leaned against the railing of the ship and took out a piece of beef jerky from her bag. She raised it above her head and waved it. A massive seagull descended from the sky with a cry and snatched the jerky in one bite. Captain Jack 1 I knew that seagulls would never get lost at sea, and they could sense the approach of storms in advance. Jack looked at the plump seagull in the sky. Although it looked similar to an ordinary seagull, it was much fatter. This journey was entrusted to Sylvie by Princess Tilly to establish connections and provide mutual assistance with another gathering place for witches. In addition to the chosen 5 renowned witches on board, there were Ashes and Molly. However, they won't stay. Their presence was only to ensure a smooth and safe voyage. Sylvie, on the other hand, had another responsibility: to uncover Roland Wimbledon's true identity. But honestly, Sylvie felt that this task wouldn't be so easy to accomplish. If the Witch Union didn't agree, it would still be manageable. But what if they didn't want the information to leak out and decided to imprison her and the other 4? Looking through the cabin wall, Sylvie sighed as she watched Leanne, Evelyn, and others happily playing with the slime. She couldn't help but hope that the witches of the Witch Union were as welcoming and friendly as Maisie had described. Ashes looked at the other witches and sighed, patting her forehead. "Y'all must remember to keep your distance from Lord Roland Wimbledon. Never be alone with him easily." "Why? Isn't he Lady Tilly's brother?" Evelyn asked, puzzled. "He is indeed," Ashes replied seriously, "but that doesn't stop him from enjoying groping witches' bottoms." Everyone gasped in shock upon hearing Ash's words. As they approached the shore, Sylvie noticed a peculiar dark shape approaching them. It was massive in size, and all the witches looked up in astonishment, hardly believing what they saw. A remarkably large spherical object floated in the air, with a wicker basket hanging beneath it. Maisie and another witch stood on either side, accompanying the basket's flight. What caught everyone's attention was the long yellow banner hanging from the bottom of the basket, displaying a bold message: "Welcome to the border town." After the basket descended, Wendy stepped forward to welcome the witches from the fjord. Then she turned her gaze towards Ash, revealing a joyful smile. The appearance of another witch caught Sylvie's attention, as her strikingly pure blue eyes resembled a pristine lake. However, what intrigued Sylvie even more was this witch's immense and flawless magical power. Lightning also arrived, followed closely by Maisie, landing on Lightning's shoulder. Once Ashes briefly introduced the witches from Slumbering Isle, Wendy smiled and invited everyone to board the basket. Ashes smiled back, bid farewell to Wendy, and departed. Wendy looked slightly disappointed seeing Ash leaving, pursing her lips, but assured Ashes that she would take good care of them. Sylvie felt a slight tremor beneath her feet as the basket lifted off the ground. She saw Ashes and Molly waving to them as the hot air balloon ascended higher and higher, shrinking the landscape below into tiny dots. She sighed. No matter what, a new life in the border town was about to begin.